I should turn our phones off. It's 8:01 according to the actual time here. And we do have 5 commissioners who were unable to join us today. But I think we will go ahead and call to order to Mr. Nolan takes a seat here. And so I've asked Jeff if he will lead us in the pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First of all, welcome to everybody. Has the agenda been posted?
Mr. Chairman?
Let's call the roll.
Commissioners Altman,
Here.
Berryman,
Here.
Breslin excused, Call,
Here.
Clarkson,
Here.
Corcoran,
Here.
Dada excused, Freeman,
Here.
Hedrick,
Here.
Hearn excused, Hughes excused, King excused, Patterson, By, Reason,
Here.
Schmitz,
Here.
Swear excused, and Jones.
Here. Do we have a quorum? All right. We're talking next about the acceptance of the agenda. Have you had a chance to look at the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Okay, the agenda will move forward as it's presented. Do we have any public comments? No public comments. All right. Then we're going to move on to the approval of the minutes of the meeting of February 13th. They're in your packet or sent to you, actually. Any additions, corrections? Anyone want to move?
So moved.
Okay, thank you. Second?
Second.
No other questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, the minutes are approved as presented. The next item were the chair's report. Just 2 things I thought I would share with you. Dan Lass, one of our new members, very new on the Airport Commission, has resigned from the commission. He was also appointed to the Major J Commission, it's not easy to say. And so he's opted to take that appointment from the City Council as opposed to remaining with the Airport Commission. So I thought I would bring that to your attention. The other thing I'll just add in terms of the way I've always led it is it really kind of makes it easier for everybody. When we're on a discussion and you want to make a comment, if you'll just raise your hand slightly or whatever else, I keep the speakers queued. So I just put down the names in the order so that you don't have to keep trying to get in all the time. Just if I acknowledge you once, I'll put the name on the queue. So it'll make it a lot easier, and then you don't have to panic and you can focus on the discussion as opposed to trying to get into the discussion. So that's just kind of my style there. And that's really all we had. We have one action item today. We have a report that will come under the commissioner's reports that Jeff Clarkson is going to provide in terms of the noise committee. Oh, I was going to mention one other thing, and that was having to do with the marketing and budget committee. You may recall in our discussion last week, we were talking about having the budget committee meeting in advance of this meeting. And what we're doing, we're going to have a presentation we're going to have a presentation this morning on the budget. And so we will be having the budget committee convening soon as, I think, Tom, you're meeting with Andrew Staff with David Reddy and others next week. And we'll have a better idea on the timeline, and then at that point it makes more sense for us to
Preceded by the marketing committee.
Pardon me?
Preceded by the marketing committee.
Preceded by the marketing committee, right. So stay tuned for that. I know some of you may have had a question in terms of whether it met or not. It did not, and that's why it did not. Well, introductions and presentations. Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Steve or Ulysses, can you get those blanks at the lights, please? There's sunshine.
Yes. And heat.
And while we're taking our time this morning, there's not a lot on the agenda, and certainly want to make it worth your time. As always, thank you everyone for taking time out of your busy day to come and join us here. So We had discussed previously, one of the challenges at the airport is because of its convenience, too many passengers still are not arriving at the airport during busy season in ample time for their flight. The airlines recommend a minimum of 90 minutes. So what we have done is we installed some digital signage. If you're arriving on a flight, well, riding down the escalators, entering the building, we have a travel tip posted above. So hopefully, isn't that exciting? Isn't that exciting? So as you're glancing up in the mountains and those that are arriving, majority, about 75% of our passengers are visitors, they can get that message. And we want them to have a good experience. So all airports get busy at some point, and we've got to be treated in that same approach by passengers to arrive early enough. If you're standing at the checkpoint,
So, Tom, did we discuss with the airlines that they themselves make the announcement on arrival?
absolutely, yes, yes, absolutely, but they won't do it.
They won't do it.
They won't. I've asked numerous times, it's not part of their repertoire. I have asked.
So if their passengers miss the flight, that they don't care?
Well, it isn't that, missing the flight doesn't happen often, but what happens is passengers have to be confronted with a rush. They get into a line that's not anticipated at the ticket counter as long as normal. So we want to just maintain the experience. There are some people, believe it or not, that arrive at a ridiculously few minutes before the flight thinking it's a bus and you just walk out and get on. But overall, we just want to change the mindset because we have graduated into the 2 million plus passenger. So it's all part of messaging. And by the way, it's interesting, there's about a 45-page advisory circular from the FAA regarding signage in airports. And people always think the more signage, the better. That's just not how it works. Just watch people in a terminal. They'll be in front of a sign that's 8 feet wide, and people just don't always read signs for whatever reason. So it's all part of the managing millions of passengers. Porsche, I was asked to sign or pledge to a confidentiality agreement over the last year. And I didn't even talk to staff too much about it, but Porsche was actually searching airports around the world to do what they call a reveal of their new model. And they were interested in doing it here, and the amount of orchestration that we had to commit to and still maintain the airport's operational and safety and efficiency, we pulled the event off. They did have it here. It was quite an impact. Just to give you a magnitude of what had occurred, they flew 7 aircraft in with dealers and reporters from all over the world. And this happened over a course of 2 weeks. Every other day they would fly an aircraft chartered in what we didn't know.
No, when did this occur?
This is real. This happened
About a month ago.
about a month ago. So we had to orchestrate all this working with the fixed base operator, Atlantic. They had hired a company out of Europe, and we had several meetings with them. But to orchestrate that and not impact the airport, there were about 150 Porsches on the airport waiting. So the chartered aircraft would come in, some of them through Airbus 320s, would fly in with 150 dealers and reporters from all over the world. They would get off the flight, and it was set up with grandstands and a sound system beyond comprehension. They would walk off the flight, and then the vehicle itself was covered up, and they had Porsches from the last 2 or 3 decades put on the reveal. It was quite an event. I do have a YouTube of it. I think you got a video of it. You could go on YouTube and probably query that. But so once they saw the reveal of the new Porsche, then everyone participating would take the vehicle to the Ritz-Carlton. So they had to hire a lot of police staff locally to orchestrate. It was the longest procession of vehicles you'd ever imagine. Imagine 150 vehicles. And it happened about 3 in the afternoon, so during that time of the season, it was awful busy.
Did you order the Perfect Sky?
Is that a perfect sky? There you go. Look at see a little backdrop there. We preferred it would have been sunny. We were a little concerned about some precipitation at that point. That's quite an event. And it worked out well. Here they are processing out depending on what color you had in there. So these types of things do occur from time to time. The Air Museum is very good at special events. There are other special events throughout the year, Mr. Chairman. I thought you'd find that of interest.
Question.
Yes.
How'd you like driving one?
How did I like driving one? Quite frankly, I'm not a need for speed. I'm a pilot. Would you believe I've never been over 100 miles an hour in a vehicle? I kid you not. I don't have an urge for speed. I get enough excitement at the airport. I don't need the exhilaration. Tom?
Yes, sir. Getting back to the 90 minutes and the signs that went up, would it make sense to have occasional public service announcement in the baggage claim area?
Yes, we do. It's already posted on those screens there. It is. So there's about a 10-second where it appears every 30 seconds. I also want to thank the CVB. Robert is here. Several months ago, at the advent of the season, you had worked together with us to get the word out. Tell us about some of the things you've done.
So one of the things is we work with all the concierges and of course all the hotel front desk people. And then we have a fairly large industry newsletter that goes out to all our 1,300 partners. So what we do is we consistently, as asked, send out all the information to arrive early and try to get the front desk people to remind people as they're checking in, as well as the concierge to remind people. So again, we're working with the airport to make sure the guest experience, the final leg as they're leaving is great, so they'll come back again.
Exactly. Thank you for all your effort. And you'll be doing that again?
Yeah, this week.
And we've sent out press releases and so forth on it, just continually in the website and other things and so forth and so forth. So that concludes my... Yes,
Oh,
sir.
just one quick question about it. Did they record it? Is this something that's going to be on their commercials or anything like that? Or any recognition of PSP? I just wondered going forward if, yeah, I just wondered if they're going to have commercials.
I don't know. It was really all about them and just our exposure just by having people from all over the world probably.
I just don't know if we would expect to see anything. Okay.
It was the launch of their new model.
Just the launch of the new model.
Of the new model, and they brought in dealers from all around the world. So the first night, if I watched real carefully, they had everybody in from France and Germany. And the next night, they had all the people in from China and Taiwan. And so every other night, a new group of these 170 people. The only sad story I can tell you about the whole thing, the party's incredible. Those beautiful cars you saw there sell between $140,000 and $240,000.
Well,
And they were all pre-production models. And they were all sent back to Germany to be crushed.
oh, come on.
What?
Because they were pre-production models. Because the car doesn't actually come out until March. But the cars were spectacular. And they really, really loved working with
I
everybody there in the valley.
don't believe that. That's shocking.
Yeah, that's what he said is.
Somebody told you a story. That doesn't sound good.
Yeah, that's good. Any other questions of Tom? Okay. Okay, well, thank you for that report, Tom. I'm not quite sure what's to do with the next item since David's not here. Do we have somebody reporting on behalf of the city? No, not yet. What we will do is move into the budget report. And who's going to lead that? Mark. Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Here we are in March, and this is really the time of the year where we take a look to see if our budget, if the rubber hits the road here. And as you can tell, at this juncture, everything is up significantly. The customer facility charges are up 17%, which reflects directly with the amount of transactions at the car rental. PFCs are up 14%. Airport revenues are flat, and that's primarily because not all of our reports you could be aware are in yet. We don't have all the landing reports, we don't have all the car rental reports. So those will come in a little bit later. You notice in the lease parking though, those numbers, thanks to Nancy's efforts, those get posted the day that the deposits are made, and parking revenues are up over 12%. So everything is double-digit increases with the revenues, and we're looking forward to a strong remainder of the year. Those numbers certainly reflect the increase in passenger traffic too. Those numbers were just sent out yesterday, and I think you probably all had a chance to look at those. But year-to-date, our passengers are up 17.5%. So it's very encouraging, and traffic continues to grow. On the last page, the summary. Just real quickly, the 405, the customer facility charge continues to generate revenue, and we do not yet have any expenditures for the year on that account. We expect shortly to have that project get underway with some final approvals, but in the near future we'll start seeing expenses. When you track the CFC account down to the bottom of the page, the cash summary, we have $20.5 million. So that revenue will continue to grow until we start approving some of the expenditures associated. The passenger facility charge year-to-date shows a negative number. That's primarily because we made extra payments against our principal. And if you track that 410 account at the bottom of the page, we have a cash balance of just over $4 million. So we maintain a positive balance whenever possible, and certainly a conservative financial approach. The 415 account, at this time of the year, we're showing a positive revenues less expenses of over $800,000. Those dollars help offset the capital improvements in the next category that we make each year. And tracking our number at the bottom of the page, the 415 unrestricted account is up just over $1 million compared to last month, and we finished the month at $2.3 million cash available and unrestricted there. So everything is very close to what we had budgeted last year, and we'll be looking at those numbers closely as we prepare actually a 2-year budget moving forward.
Any questions of Mark?
Yeah, Mark, I sound like a broken record because I seem to be bringing it up every time. But the Air Incentive Program went into effect February 7th. So to me, that means there is no longer a restricted air services incentive fund. Shouldn't that be part of the unrestricted cash now?
Well, it
By
actually,
the end, this is the end of February.
correct.
And the new program actually started February 7th.
Correct. When we put this budget together, we did not anticipate that. So at this point, we just let the money lie there. So when we do the new budget, we will transfer those funds.
Okay, because I mean, really, once we have the new program, there's really no need for.
Correct.
Good point.
Any other questions of Mark? On the budget, wait, before you sit down, then can you kind of lead us through then the steps of as it relates to what we're going to be doing in the budget committee? Just kind of a timeline as best you know it at this point.
Next week, we meet with Nancy's staff and the city manager, and we'll kind of go over the parameters at the 10,000-foot level. The anticipation would be the following week, we'll get together with the airport commission and take a look at some of the challenges we have moving forward. Some of the things are the same as we've talked about in the past. Some of the additional PERS costs, some of the other expenditures that we expect. We'll talk a lot about projects and some of the things that are going to be prioritized for next year. As I just touched on briefly, we'll be getting into the rental car design project of the consolidated facility. That will be coming into play significantly next year. With PFCs, we'll be talking about the new bonding issue as we will be opening up bids on the ticket wing project on April 9th. So we will have a much better idea of how those funds are shaking out, and then how we budget accordingly for the PFC funds. The M&O account 415 will take a look at some of the changes we anticipate, changes in payroll costs. I believe you all recall that the city manager is supporting an airport engineer position, so that would be a new position here. And we certainly concur with that, with all the projects we have going on, from ticket wing to rental cars to some of the other expenditures. It will be very helpful to have someone on staff here. So those would be the primary things we'll be looking at, prioritizing, and evaluating how we pay for all those things.
How we pay for all that. Is it still your expectation, and then maybe it's too early to respond, because we talked about this earlier, that we may be looking at some fixed cost and things that we have to do that we don't have necessarily the revenue to do? We have to figure out how to pay for it.
Well, some of those things may come out of our existing fund balance. As you notice, we have a couple $1 million set aside.
Right.
Moving forward, the other thing we'll be looking at for next year is beginning to work on a new airline agreement. So the airlines here, certainly we want to work with those partners because that drives everything else. with the increase in passenger traffic, that has resulted in very positive numbers for concessions and parking and rental car transactions and all of those other fees. So we want to do everything we can to keep the positive growth and continue revenues. The other thing we'll be looking at next year is new concession agreements. So we'll be evaluating increasing the percentage that we get from those facilities and opportunities that will come from that. So there's a lot of things that will be going on. I would imagine we'll have several meetings. I would not expect to bring a budget to the commission in April. I think that would be premature with all the things going on. Imagine opening up bids on the project April 9th and then some of the other things that we have to evaluate. It would probably be more realistic to expect a budget to come back to this group in May.
Question on the new engineer position. Is that a shared position with the city, or is that solely the airport's responsibility?
We have to discuss that with the city manager and get those details, and those are the types of things we need to get information. Good question.
Any other questions for Mark then? All right. Okay, the next item is an action item, actually. I believe, and Tom's going to lead us about adding a $3 fee to all TNC drop-offs. So Tom, do you want to?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Refer to your page 11A. And I'm going to, since we have the time, I won't read it verbatim, but we're considering adding a $3 fee to all TNC drop-offs. I think that's the key word here, is because we currently charge for all pickups. But we are looking to do a drop-off fee as well. Now, if you remember in the previous action on TNCs, Palm Springs City Council amended Chapter 1637 of the Municipal Code to accept the CPUC standards for transportation network carriers as it relates to methods of preventing drivers from driving under the influence of substances and allow versatility in the TNC pickup when needed for operational purposes. After that, about 2 months, Uber and Lyft did approach the airport after the city council amended that municipal code and requested a permit. That took a little time because each company had changes to the existing permit. We had to work that through with the city attorney. So we've gotten them on board since then, and since that time, it's integrated fairly well into the ground transportation landside network. There have been some challenges in trying to anticipate the demand cycle and so forth. Just to remind you, all of you, on how that works, if you look at the map of the airport, over on Kirk Douglas, we have that large vacant parking lot. We have carved away a certain number of spaces for the pre-parking of the TNCs. Now, what's so special about TNC operations is they've developed their own proprietary software, which they call geofencing, and it uses GPS points. When we carved out that rectangle out in the parking lot, we gave the longitude and latitude of each of the points, and the only way a TNC driver can get a pickup is they have to enter the airport and park in that area. Once they park in that area, that triggers the proprietary software to put them in a line for when somebody calls for a ride at the terminal, then that system will actually allow that person, it'll ping on driver Joe Smith's iPhone, and then they'll go to the terminal. What we wanted to avoid was hundreds of TNC vehicles circling the airport, parking in driveways and on streets and at Burger Kings and McDonald's and so forth. This is an organized way to handle that. It's been used at other airports. It took a lot of effort and it worked very well. One of the things we discovered putting that in is what they had restroom needs as well, because we found out people weren't using the appropriate restroom facility, so we put a portable restroom facility out there for the TNC drivers. So logistically, that's worked well. If you recall, the city council also designated a specific area on the front curb. It was contrary to what the commission, Mr. Chairman, had suggested at one time. The commission wanted to put it more on the front curb. We had a number of spaces, but the council, in their wisdom, said, no, it shall remain in the commercial lane with everyone else. We've had to play with signage a little bit. The ironic part of it is, if you follow the iPhone, you're in direct communications with the driver. It shows
Right.
as a blink,
Right.
a blink on that. But some people still require signage. We've modified that without trying to overwhelm customers and take away other signage that's comparable to the other ground transportation carriers. So with that being said, we have looked at the financials here, and let's talk, before we get into what other airports are doing, we always like to look at different cost centers of the airport. We like to look at our airfield as a cost center, the terminal area as a cost center, and then the landside area as a cost center. Mark, let's talk about anticipated expenditures of what we're going to have for the landside that we need to offset with the appropriate revenue streams.
Well, of course, we have staff that is directly involved with the permitting and the inspections and those sorts of things. We have 2 full-time people at the Vehicle Inspection Plaza. Some of you may have been to that facility, and they track all of the ins and outs of each of the vehicles using those commercial lanes. In addition to that, we're going to be purchasing new equipment to electronically track each of those transactions next year. Those bids actually open up, I believe, in about probably next week. So we will be going through the process to put new equipment in so we can very accurately track everyone coming, each company, the cab companies, the limo companies, and everyone individually. So we have a second way for tracking, making sure we're getting all of the revenue. So we have the cost of the staff there. We have the cost of the taxi starter. As many of you who may have used services here notice that we have someone who assists with making sure there's cabs at appropriate times, and they dispatch those folks from the waiting area. Normal routine things such as utilities, electrical upkeep, and things of that nature. But the new equipment will be a major piece. And one of the reasons we're considering this, of course, is the impact that Uber has had, Uber and Lyft have had on our local market. Last year we had 3 cab companies. This year we have 2. So we will be receiving less revenue from all those additional taxi cabs and some of the fees associated with those transactions. So that offset is going to the drop-off fee, and that should create a balanced budget for that cost center.
Mr. Chairman, so the cumulative effect of all those costs, a couple of things we forgot to mention is pavement maintenance. All that pavement that the TNCs are sitting on out of Kirk Douglas have to be maintained, has to be crack sealed, has to be marked on an every couple year basis. The commercial lane itself is tricky during peak season. It can become inundated, and so we have to maintain that commercial lane as well. The access point, we had to invest in new equipment for the TNCs to enter in a separate lane. We also have that porta potty I mentioned. So all those cumulative costs with the lost opportunity costs, Mr. Chairman, are, I think, justifiable to be able to charge an additional fee. Well, then we have to ask ourselves, what's a reasonable additional fee? So if you look on page 2, if you can, of your report, you can see that we did a survey of all Southern California airports to find out, if you can look in the 3rd column, the drop-off fee, we're the only airport that is not charging for drop-off. We're the only airport, yet we have costs that we need to recover. You can see they all range from $2.25 up to $4, and we thought $3 would be pretty much the norm there. We do charge for the pickup. There's an airport or two that may be lesser, greater than on the pickup, but the drop-off, Mr. Chair, is something that is on the table here. We think it's justifiable from an operating revenue standpoint, and I think it's a smart thing to do from the comparable to other airports.
I make a motion to approve.
Second.
Then a motion. Now we come to discussion first. Does anybody have any questions for Tom?
Yeah.
So how does this compare to what a taxi company is paying?
Yeah, the taxis actually pay $3 as well for drop-off only for that pickup. The difference, as we've heard recently, is that there is a difference. This is a little complicated, but every taxi cab firm has to pay an annual fee of $279 per cab to become permitted at the airport. Whereas the TNC model they were very clever, and when they orchestrated this from a corporate level, there's been a lot of discussion. But it's the TNC that gets permitted, and then there may be 4,000 vehicles underneath it. We've had ground transportation providers here complain of the disparity, that each one of those drivers should pay the annual permit fee. But at some point, you gotta say what's reasonable and unreasonable, right? 5,000 permits, you don't even have the staff to be able to permit 5,000 people because it involves an inspection and so forth. So we go ahead, the path of least resistance would be that $3, which I think would be a good equalizer in terms of the disparity of ground transportation charges.
But still, the cab company is paying substantially more.
Well,
If they're paying a permit fee per cab upfront, $279 or whatever the amount is, and we're only charging Lyft $279, the cab company theoretically is paying 50 times more
well,
initially.
So let me just,
well, let me try. We did an analysis of the last year of the fees. The taxis overall paid $222,155.50. The TNCs paid $204,391. So,
Can you say that again, repeat that one?
so I'm sure.
That's without the drop-off.
It is, absent the drop-off fee, the $222,000 was collected from the taxis, and then $204,000 from the TNCs. So, as much as mathematically, arithmetic-wise, you said it should have been, it isn't as substantial. Now, that may be because the number of rides, so there's looking at one TNC operation versus one taxi, there is a disparity, and we need to close that gap, so your observation is correct. But the amount of that cumulative gap isn't maybe as profound. But we think this $3 will help equalize that.
And the taxis don't pay for a pickup, you say?
Correct.
the taxi don't pay for a drop-off.
For drop-off, that's it.
I'm sorry, Bill?
Yeah, just a question, Tom. Was this fee negotiated with the TNCs, or was it a unilateral decision on
It
that?
was, we notified them that we're considering that and really asked for their opinion. They said, we're not happy about it, but we understand, and I think the blanket of all other airports doing it was our cover. If we were inventing something new, quite frankly, I'm not sure I would have been in support of that. We always want to remain competitive with other airports, so if we're pardon the pun, but if we're doing what the Joneses are doing, then we're covered, right, Mr.
Right, that's
Chairman Jones?
exactly correct. Other questions of Tom?
My motion stands.
Oh, the motion stands, yeah, no, we've already had the motion and a second, but we've had a discussion for the public question. Yeah?
So why not charge a $3 drop-off fee too? I mean, that just puts,
To whom?
for each, on each ride. Because that would put
That's
us,
what we're proposing for the TNCs.
so we're just going from free to $3.
That's
Correct.
exactly,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it'd be from $0 to $3.
That's exactly what's being proposed.
Okay.
And I'm impressed with the description, and thank you for that, in terms of how all of this gets calculated, in terms of just automatically the
It's not
cars.
capricious, it's
Yeah.
well thought out.
Very good. Any other questions before we call for the questions? All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, unanimously passed.
Thank you very much.
Question now, what is the process for this? Does this require city council?
We're not sure. We have to see what we said.
All right.
We don't think it does, but we were sure.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, executive director and staff reports. What's the next?
We talked about the budget process. Let's talk about the car rental project. Gensler was one of the 3 consultants selected from a nationwide procurement process. We're 98% of the way there. I'm the one negotiating with Gensler on their fee. The next step, there's one correction that I said to Gensler that we have to correct in the proposal. We've gone back and forth for months now because we're talking a significant amount of funding. The next step, Mr. Chairman, is to send them to the car rental department. Because they're experts, they do this, they have properties, experts, just like we do with the airlines and so forth. I'm going to send them that agreement and let them take several weeks to go through that, make any recommendations, are there things they don't want in that scope or things they do want, so we can whittle down and get that done. Then the next step would be to take that to city council. That is a project that's taken a long time to get it right. Ticketing bid. The bid for the long-awaited ticketing project is due April 9th. And we're very excited about that. We have four pre-qualified contractors. We had a pre-con here not too long ago.
Right, I was on that.
Let's keep our fingers crossed that we get some great bids coming in. And our truck procurement, our ACIP, Airport Capital Improvement Plan, as you know, we want to replace our vehicles. We're going to get 2 brand new 1,500-gallon aircraft rescue and firefighting vehicles. And we have hired the esteemed firm of WSP to help us with that. That is on City Council tonight. Once that's approved, we'll move forward in designing and get that FAA grant, get that on the street. The lead time on trucks is about 1.5 years. TSA checkpoint, a lot of work going on with that. We have gotten, the good news is we've hired WSP a couple months back. We're in a rush here to add an addendum to the ticketing project bid that will do some long-term improvements, not major, but enough to be worthy of a contractor of that magnitude, whereby we will take some load-bearing walls down, and we are going to be able to, we currently have 5 machines in that area. We'll have 6. We'll also have longer divestiture tables on probably 3 of the existing 5.
That would be helpful.
Collectively, we'll be very excited. Probably have a...
Just remind me, we were approved for another one. You reported to us for another checkpoint, not checkpoint.
Machine. That's 6.
We were
In that plan, and we're also going to cover ourselves for the next 5 to 8 years, I figure, by having another area that can add up to 1 to 2 more machines there. So exciting stuff. But it takes a lot of work, especially from Washington, D.C., TSA. They have their process. The 737 MAX, you've been... If you recall, our previous chairman, Bob Elsner, always was very excited about how we're growing, and I've always tempered that optimism with anything can happen. This is a perfect example of how anything, in fact, I even mentioned airworthiness certification of aircraft, that you can have a terrorist attack, you can have an airworthiness certificate of an aircraft. So there's a lot of discussion on the news about the airworthiness certification of the 737 MAX. We do have that aircraft operating at the airport. I fully trust that the FAA has enough talent and staff to be able to dedicate the appropriate time. They're right on it. Now, what they end up doing, we don't know. Everyone's speculating, but right now they're saying that aircraft is okay to fly. And if at one point they come out and say there's an airworthiness that might warrant that aircraft from flying, there's approximately 1,600 daily flights across the United States that utilize that aircraft. So I won't say I told you so, but things can change, and it's not a big presence here at our airport, but it is present, but it all has that effect.
But it doesn't have to be a presence here. If it's a problem somewhere else, it
That's
may affect us.
exactly, Peter, you're right. If you're flying from here on a non-737 to Denver, and you're supposed to connect to Washington, D.C.
Right.
So, like I said, hold the champagne bottles.
Those are the
You
flights
know,
to Dallas and Chicago?
No, I didn't get specific. I was using Peter's example.
That was just an example.
If there isn't an issue here, if you connect to another airport, that may be part of the thing.
Not only that, but if you have a MAX flying between Chicago and New York, and all of a sudden you ground that entire fleet, you're going to have to get aircraft from other sources, and then you look at the density of traffic and seasonalities and all of that, and you get affected even if we don't have it operating. So we may still get affected by it.
But it's only American to Dallas and Chicago.
We are not talking about any, I didn't mention any airline, and I won't discuss airlines.
No, but it doesn't matter if it's,
No, I understand.
if it's any other airline. If they ground it,
Yeah.
I mean, that could potentially affect us.
Bill was number one in the queue, so we'll go back to Bill, and then it was going to be Kevin, so go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I don't know whether you noticed, in this morning's paper, there's an article, Congress has asked FAA to ground them.
Right.
And the FAA so far said, yeah, we're not gonna consider that until we get some more research. So works are in, Congress is asking the FAA to ground them. The airlines are saying, no, it's okay, and so it's up in the air. That's fun.
But as Peter pointed out, too, it could affect us even.
Well, and there's many countries, including the European Union, that have grounded the
Oh,
aircraft.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I just learned India has grounded theirs. China, yeah. So who knows?
Any other questions on this point before Tom, why don't you go ahead with your
We live in a dynamic industry,
We're doing
Mr.
it.
Chairman, we can change. Flair Airlines started back in November, and they have informed us, I sent an email to you, that they have decided that the Palm Springs market wasn't fulfilling their bottom line needs, so they have cut their service early, and that was back in February. Concessions, we talked a little bit about that. We've hired a consultant to evaluate our concession program. We are doing that. There's been multiple discussions, a couple of visits, and we're still assembling. The consultant has several months to do this. We're analyzing what the best opportunities are, Mr. Chairman, and see where we move from that as well. Included in that Recondo Associates evaluation is a separate study on the airline agreement, and that agreement, our current agreement has been in place for many decades, with the exception of about 3 to 5 years ago. We took that old agreement, did some minor alterations, and then renewed it with the airlines. But it's really important we take a very careful look at that. So
We actually talked about that at the last commission, in part of the budget overview, so.
USO, we have a new USO manager. Introduce yourself.
Hey, good morning, everybody.
Tell everybody.
My name is Jeff Midge. I've been a volunteer over there for a couple of years, and we just had a turnover of the center manager. So I got kind of promoted from volunteer to be the new center manager here for the USO. So I'm grateful for your gracious use of the space we've been allocated. And we were really busy. We get 30-odd thousand military folks through our facility here at the airport. And our outreach programs up to 29 Palms reached tens of thousands of more. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
As commissioners, can we come sometime and just check it out?
Oh, anytime you want, just come on over, yeah.
I was just thinking the same thing, Jeff. I haven't been over there. I need to go over there and take a look.
So how about after the meeting, take a walk over there, Mayor?
Yeah.
So how do you get there exactly?
Just walk through the...
Wait a minute, follow the sign.
There is signage, that's right.
And the announcements.
And the announcements.
If you don't get there within a day, we'll send out a survey. So, Mr. Chairman, yeah, afterwards, why don't you take a walk over there? That'd be great. Mr. Chairman, I think that concludes. We are very, very busy. A lot of
We are
little
very
nuances.
busy indeed.
Staff is really, it's pedal to the metal now.
Well, I'm keeping my eye on the clock. We thought this would go slow, but it isn't. I mean, we've got a few things yet. So Commissioner request a report. I'm going to call on Jeff Clarkson first, Chair of the Noise Committee, to report on the committee meeting that they had recently.
Sure. We had a productive meeting of the Noise Committee a couple of weeks
Can you
ago.
speak up just a little bit? I hear the
Yeah, have to
background.
catch it on the mic.
Sure, it's difficult.
And there's noise
But
from
I'll
the
try.
lobby area that I'm hearing too.
Okay. We had a productive meeting of the Noise Committee a couple of weeks ago on February 28th. Thank you to the commissioners who showed up, Bill and Patricia. The main purpose of the meeting was to discuss enhancements to the airport's website with more information about noise issues, what's being done, history, that sort of thing. If you've ever looked at the information on the airport's website, which is run through the city, the information about noise is kind of sparse. There is a noise hotline and some information about helicopters, but Tom has been very good. This is the third noise committee meeting since I've been on the commission. In the first two meetings, Tom has been very good about making presentations, a lot of really good information about noise at the airport, kind of the history, what the airport has done to address some of these issues, what the limitations are in addressing some of those issues. It was really good information. And my thought was this information would be good to get out to the public, and perhaps it's not getting out to the public because we have these situations, once or twice a year it seems like, where someone has a noise complaint, they go to the media, and there's some reports about that. And I think a lot of it has to do with misunderstandings about what the airport can and can't do and has done. One of the main reasons I joined the Airport Commission was because of noise issues. I live close to the airport. I have lots of friends who live in Sunmore, which is probably the neighborhood most affected. And my fiance lives under the flight path, so I hear those planes. There's a couple of things that I've learned since being on the commission. Number one is that Tom and the airport staff are very responsive to noise issues, and they do what they can when they can about those noise issues. The second thing I've learned is they are very limited in what they can do because the federal government has preemption over a lot of these issues on flight paths and that sort of thing. It's the FAA. The military has a right to use this airport. We can't affect that. So there are some of these issues that we really can't do anything about, although we can explain to the public, what the situation is and why. And I think that helps a lot. If people understand why things are, they're like, okay, that makes sense to me. So Tom gave a very good presentation at this last meeting about some of the additions that we're looking to make to the information on the website about airport noise. The airport is growing, everyone knows that, and no one is anti-growth. But there are some interesting things that people might not be aware of. I think Tom has mentioned this, is that the number of planes, airline movements at the airport has remained relatively constant over the past 5 years or so, 5 or 6 years since 2013, but the number of passengers has grown 35%. So we're keeping the number of planes about the same, so that's a positive. There are some things that aren't so recent as well. Aircraft has improved over the years. They're much more quiet now. We don't have DC-10s, rumbling around and that sort of thing. Airplanes have hush kits. They're engineered much more quietly now. So the problem, a lot of it has gone away just because of that. But, some of this information would be good to have on the web page. A lot of people, sometimes people will talk about curfews and wanting a curfew at the airport. That's an issue that's controlled by the FAA. We really can't just arbitrarily impose a curfew, and it would be pretty difficult, if not impossible, really, for Palm Springs to impose a curfew at this airport. So that's the type of information I think make people feel better about, that the airport is doing something, that there's not this misunderstanding. There's also signs all around the airport asking pilots to do what they can to be considerate. We have a good neighbor policy at this airport, and we try to manage its growth and be cognizant of the fact that we're in the middle of a city, and many of the homes in Palm Springs are affected by airport noise. So we have to be mindful of that. Tom has also written a letter to military pilots asking them to be considerate of that as well, and it's been published on the website, and it's also posted at the couple of FBOs on the airport property. So the goal is to have that information out there to the public so they know something's being done, and the airport is cognizant of noise issues and does its best to manage those issues. So sometimes I hear comments from residents who aren't affected by airport noise, like, oh, somebody should have known about that when they bought their house. Well, you really can't know until you live in the house. Plus, as I said, a large percentage of the houses in Palm Springs are affected to some degree by airport noise. I never hear these things from Tom or his staff. They're always very responsive, receptive, and willing to talk to residents about these issues. And I just think it's important that we all remember there's a good neighbor policy at the airport, and we can't be making those kind of comments. We've got to be sympathetic, I think, to people and their noise concerns. To the extent that there can be something done, I know there's some ground noise issues that Tom has addressed since I've been on the commission, and effectively. So there are some things that the airport can do, and there is the hotline. So that information just needs to be pushed out to the public more.
I think what's important, what Jeff has reported, I don't think probably most of the commissioners know the steps that Tom has taken and the airport has taken and what our limitations are, Jeff, that you so accurately outlined. And I think it's really important, and I think having that information available on the web goes a long way. One thing I would remind us all, though, if any of you get any questions about the noise, rather than trying to attempt to answer, the best policy I've learned, I refer everything to Tom. And he's very responsive. So rather than trying to respond, if you have people that contact you or neighbors or friends, just refer them to Tom. I think it's fair to say, and he can give them the in-depth kind of response. What, any questions that anyone has of Jeff and what the committee and Tom has done in the airports then? Okay.
Following along the website is helpful. Tom, have you found that the letter to the military that you have on the website, has that been helpful?
Yes.
I know Tom has even gone up and talked to these pilots personally about issues. Don't be revving up your engines and that sort of stuff.
Sometimes very aggressively.
Yes, he does. He is. He's good. He's ex-military himself, so.
All right. Well, then, thank you. No other questions on that. Any other commissioner requests or reports?
Yes, Chairman, if I may answer with a personal announcement, I'm happy to announce that my wife and I are celebrating our 55th wedding anniversary.
Wow. Yeah. That's really nice. Okay, any other commissioner requests or reports? One thing I've been asked, and this is what I'm going to start next time under the chairman's report. A couple of you, both continuing commissioners and new commissioners, said, it would be kind of nice to know kind of the background of each commissioner, to understand kind of the comments and the experience that we bring to bear. So I thought what I would start next time under the chair, I haven't even told Tom this, so Tom's going to go crazy.
I know everything. You all have, the first time I shook hands with you, there should be a little, let me see.
You know everything. He had planned
GPS
it,
receiver, you know where you want to.
the GPS, just like my dog. Anyway, so what I'm going to be asking is maybe just 2 or 3, it's going to depend on the agenda how many we do, but ask each commissioner to take maybe a couple of minutes and just to kind of very quickly summarize kind of their background and experience that would have a bearing on your role here, I think, at the Airport Commission, or any other aspect that would be helpful. When each of us came on, just as Kevin did at one of the earlier meetings, we asked them to do a really brief, but I've had 2 or 3 of you that actually said, gosh, I would really like to know a little bit more about the airport commissioners and their background and experience. It helps put into context some of your contacts, their experience. We've got a wealth of experience on here. So if you want to start thinking about that, and if there's 2 or 3 of you that would like to do this starting at the next meeting, rather than me just calling on you blindly, please shoot me an email or let me know. Otherwise, I will tell you in advance which ones we'll start with. So I hope you will indulge. I hope you will find this helpful. I'm not even going to ask if you're going to find it helpful. My prerogative as chairman, I'm doing it anyway.
Can you start though with filling out the Form 700, right? It's that time of year again.
Oh, is it that time of year again?
And
No, we haven't received, no, that was last fall.
No, it's going to have to be done.
Is it going to have to be? It seems like I'm always doing it.
It's like April 1st, I think.
Is it April 1st? We haven't received anything from the city.
Well, you should be very.
Did you?
I have.
Electronically. It's very easy.
Everything was done electronically. Yeah. It's
Because I
all,
just, for whatever reason, maybe I had to do it because of the reappointment.
well, you should have done it about a month ago.
Well, I've already done what they asked me to do. I'll go check.
I just saw a bulletin come across the screen here that Canada is now restricting 737 MAXs.
Yeah, it's sorry.
And I can tell you that will influence our money.
All right, moving forward, we have anyone reporting on the council actions? No? No, all right. Then we have any correspondence? No correspondence. You have the airline activity report. As you will note on that, we were at 2.327 million for 2018, up from 2.1 million the year before. I mean, we are growing, as we've said, so that's, we hope that continues.
Well, Mr. Chairman, more on the data here, if you look for the month of February, it was at 16.
16, yeah.
16.5.
Yeah, an increase just for the month of February. That's a pretty significant increase. So already we're ahead of where we were last year. And if you look at January, the same thing, we're 18, almost like 19% ahead. So getting a lot of play. I would also reiterate, tell your friends and the rest to come 90 minutes earlier. I've been flying more regularly in and out because I've taken on that kind of consulting contract. And I am now coming at least 90 minutes in advance myself, even without check luggage.
Very good, sir.
So there's a lot to do out in there once you get through the security. I mean, there's a lot of places to go and wander around and eat and spend money, right, exactly right. But I also might come at 90 minutes early, so. So we've received and filed the reports for the activity. Is that, yes? Any other items for the good of the order before we adjourn? No? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Now, does anybody want to go over to the USO?
Please.
I'd like to do that as well. Do you have time?
Yeah, you should do it.
Okay, give us